Friends, I can't be making 15-minute videos for your sake more than mine. So, yesterday was an exception where we talked about carbon pricing. And I think the fact that I had to make such a long video does illustrate the point of just how complex it is and how and why it's been poorly received by the Canadian public. It was not explained very well. When you hear opponents of the tax and talk about axing the tax, they conveniently leave out, as I said yesterday, the fact that 100% of the money that is collected is returned to the public. 90% of it directly to households. I showed you the schema yesterday, the schedule of payments and how much you get. And then the other 10% directly to infrastructural and community developments. And so, is it really a tax when 80% of the people get back more than they put in, and the rest is distributed to things that our communities need? All right, so that was the carbon tax, and I did get a question afterwards where I talked about how the money you pay at the pump, like I said, 80% of it on average is returned to the average person. So what I want to say about that is not, you're not getting all the money you spend on gas back. What you are getting back is the percentage of what you pay at the pumps that is collected in carbon tax. So as I said, in April of this year, the increase on the carbon price was about 3 cents per liter. So that 3 cents plus the other few cents every year before that, since this was instituted in 2019, that is what is returned. It's the percentage of your total payment at the pump that is returned, the percentage that is the carbon tax. Okay, so hopefully that was clear. Now, today I want to move on to cap and trade. But before I do that, I want to show you real quick something else that opponents of this program say, and that is that it contributes massively to inflation. Well, the Bank of Canada maintains that the carbon tax is responsible for 0.15% of the inflation rate. So I want to throw up here a slide where you can see, even if you can't make out all the numbers, this goes back to September of last year. So basically, in one calendar year, the price of inflation going down on the far left column in September last year, inflation was 3.8%. And now, August of this past year, 2%. So there's various economic measures that are helping the price of inflation go down. And when you look at all of those bars, remember the carbon tax or carbon pricing, whatever the scheme, is responsible for 0.15% of whatever that number is, 3.8 last year to this year. Okay. So it is simply not true that having carbon pricing causes inflation to rise. We see that it's all other factors that are causing inflation to rise. And in fact, it does come down even as, and I want to remind you, the price of carbon has gone up. So we've seen the price of carbon go up. That is part of the carbon pricing plan, increase the price while things decrease. But then also inflation is going down at the same time. So let's talk briefly, yeah, right, about, but I don't want this to be a 15-minute video. Really quickly, what is cap and trade? Well, under a carbon tax, as I just said, the price of carbon emissions goes up per ton every year, $10 per year when it started at $20 a ton in 2019, and it's gone up $10 until 2022, and now it's going up $15 a year to a maximum of $170 per ton of carbon emissions between now and 2030. And the incentive for that is to make it more expensive and cause consumers, users, producers to decrease their carbon emissions by looking for more innovative ways to get their energy, green sources and things like that. So that's the incentive. But you'll notice that emissions, there's no limit on emissions. Emissions can continue to rise or be used as the market sees fit, as consumers see fit. They just have to pay more and more. Now, what a cap and trade does, the cap part refers to the government setting a limit on the legal amount of emissions that are permitted in the country. So altogether, our activity cannot be above a certain level of emissions. That is the cap part. Now, the trade part comes in when large emitters are given a quota, and this is done for free. They opt in. They must opt in, or they are given an auction. So they're given a number, and there's a different processes there. I won't bore you with the minutia of that. Different processes by which a company. So if you owned a steel company, you would say, I need X number of emissions allowed, and you think that you can meet that framework. And now you have an incentive based on that number. If you come in under that number of emissions, then you can bank the remaining number of emissions and use them next year. Because again, the government now knows the maximum number of emissions will be this amount of carbon and greenhouse gases going into the air and into the atmosphere. Now, if you're a company that goes above that allotment that was assigned to you, then you need to purchase credits from the next company, say the company next door that went under their emissions. That's where the trade comes in. And so companies have a huge incentive to come in under their allotted emission maximum and say, look, we have 20% under that we came in, and now another company can purchase the several thousand tons more emissions because we came under. This company doesn't think they can meet it. They're going to come in over. They're going to sustain huge fines and penalties from the government if they go over. But if they purchase the credits, then we get money. So they will literally make a cash transfer payment and purchase the credits from that company. And that company can then again invest further. They have more profits. And the company that went over, they didn't have to pay government fines or face penalties, but they did have to pay to purchase more emissions. And that is because likely they did not invest in greener sources of energy. So you do see how inherent in this market system of cap and trade, and again, the emissions caps, and then the credits that are traded on the market, as the emission cap gets lower. So that's the difference in carbon pricing. The carbon price goes up and up and up, as I described before. In this case, you're not increasing the price of carbon, you are decreasing the maximum allowable emissions or the credits, and they get lower. And so companies are further incentivized to continue to innovate and make sure that they come in below their emissions cap. And usually that means by greening up their processes, finding different sources of energy. And we see in places where this is happening, Quebec, for example, made an agreement with California. They're pretty famous for this, where they are in a cap and trade system instead of what we have here in New Brunswick. Nova Scotia moved from a cap and trade system to more output-based productions, as I mentioned yesterday, OBPS. And so different provinces, different territories are working out what works best for them. And I do want to just give you some examples here. I'm going to flip through some slides and go to a slide here that shows areas where this is happening. China uses a cap and trade to great success. They are seeing a huge drop in their greenhouse gas emissions. In the European Union's emissions trading system, capped emissions from stationary structures were 29% lower in 2018 than when the program started in 2005. 30% reduction in emissions. Remember, the goal is to be zero emissions, net zero by 2050. That's where companies have gone green, sustainable energy sources. The cap and trade system works in China. It's working in the European Union. In the US, California's climate policies have led to a steady decline of the state's carbon dioxide pollution. They use a cap and trade program primarily, and their emissions from sources subject to the cap declined 10% between 2013 and 2018. And their economy is thriving. They're one of the largest economies in the world, just the state of California. So hopefully, again, that was clear. Yes, it's not going to be a 15-minute video. It's still long. But that is the carbon pricing system, the cap and trade system. BC uses both. So again, if you're wondering, well, which one should we choose? BC has said that they're going to keep carbon pricing, the model we're familiar with price at the pump and then a rebate, that federal program. And they also use the provincial cap and trade system as well. The federal government looks at the provincial plan and it needs to comply with the federal regulations as well. Right now, New Brunswick has proposed one under this government, and the federal government is analyzing it for approval. So that's where we're at. But as we said before, Greens would replace the current system with the cap and trade system because we produce so much oil and gas in this province, and oil and gas production accounts for 30% of all emissions just by itself. So that is why we want to see Irving and oil and gas producers come in under. They need to be regulated because they are accounting for the lion's share from as a single entity. Public transit, transportation, I don't mean public transit, I mean transportation among we citizens of the public, it accounts for 22% of pollution, and that's second place. So you can get an idea there of how huge oil and gas production is for generating greenhouse gases. And that's why with heavy industry and large emitters, it's that cap and trade system that incentivizes them to go down. Remember, we are paying Irving directly with a 4-cent gas subsidy right at the pump. Every time you pump gas, 4 cents of that. 3 cents of that is that carbon tax, quote unquote, that we will then all get back in rebates. 4 cents of that, and people are far less irate about this in New Brunswick, is the charge that the New Brunswick government levied on us to pay Irving to clean up its gas to meet federal regulations, clean up its production. So again, we are seeing that we are not seeing that money back. That amounted to about $18 to $20 million, according to the previous government reports that we paid. And again, the carbon tax, we are getting all those proceeds back either in our pockets or in our community. So obviously Greens believe in these programs. They are very progressive policies that are being implemented all over the world. They are working so that our world is a cleaner place. All right, let's get off of this policy wonk stuff, but I hope that was helpful to give you an understanding when you're thinking about what Greens want to do, what Liberals are talking about, what Conservatives aren't doing, and you want to be an informed voter. Early voting is on Saturday. I will remind you of that. And so find your nearest early voting advanced polling station, and election day is on the 21st. I will be back tomorrow for episode 122 with something entirely different. I do want to talk about strategic voting right before advanced polls and why you should just not think about strategic voting at all. More on that tomorrow.